reason for this is because I haven't really automated every bits of the back end of this. So I've got to press a few buttons before it all works, which is what I'm doing now. And I think I'm live in every place, which is perfect. We're live, everybody. So welcome to Brainfood Live on Air, episode 71. I'm delighted to bring you this show. We're here every Friday, and we've got an amazing special with you today, because instead of having the usual multi-guest, multi-host format, it's going to be one-to-one, me and a very special guest who I'll introduce to you very shortly. Now, before I do that, I just want to do a quick sound check because we are broadcasting live on Crowdcast, LinkedIn Live, Facebook, Periscope, some other place I don't know. So whatever channel you're on, can you just quickly indicate to me that you can hear me okay? Just a quick comment or a thumbs up somewhere, and just signal to me that I can hear you fine. I see nothing on Crowdcast right now, for instance. I have no idea whether you can hear me or not. So ping me a quick message on that chat stream or on the comment. That will tell me that everything is fine and we're ready to keep going. Okay, we've got a few comments coming through there. That seems okay. There's a bit of a lag though. That's an interesting experiment, isn't it? Okay, I think we're okay in various places that we're at, which is good stuff. Yeah, there is about 10-second lag. Okay, so for your interest, Neil, whatever we say, we've got 10 seconds before we rapidly try and pull it back. Even though there's no mechanism to do that, like whatever we say actually does go out live, which is important to know because you've got a very important job. So I want to welcome everybody. Actually, no, before I welcome everybody, I've got to say a quick word to our sponsors, of course. Our sponsors this week are CVCheck. CVCheck are in the people kind of referencing business. If you want to de-risk the hires that you're hiring, you need to use a service to really efficiently check out and confirm whether the people you're bringing on board have the qualifications that they say they have. They've got hundreds of thousands of record checks every year, 20,000 or so businesses, massive in APAC, and then bigger than ever in EMEA as well. So check out CVCheck, cvcheck.com. That is the business that you want to look at if you are in the business of referencing checking. I think particularly useful when we're now in this remote era and often doing large-scale hiring, emergency worker hiring, stuff like that. You can't do the manual one-to-one type of referencing check. Okay, so that's CVCheck. Anyway, let's go move on with the show. Today's special guest is Neil Carberry, CEO of the Recruitment and Employers Confederation, the largest, I believe, industry body in the recruitment business in the UK, maybe the world. So Neil, welcome to the show. Great to have you on Brainfood Live on Air.
Thanks, Phil. It's really good to be here. I think me and Richard Wildquist of the ASA tend to have an argument over who's got the bigger organisation globally. But yeah, I run the REC. The REC is the UK's recruitment industry representative body and professional body. And among other things, I'm also a board director of the World Employment Confederation, which is the global body that brings the REC and the ASA and all of our other national federations together. So gives it a nice global perspective as well.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why you're the ideal person to talk about this topic, Neil, because obviously, I think we're all past the shock phase of COVID-19. We're now kind of wanting to look around the corner a little bit. A lot of us are coming back to work. Furlough's going to end. We've got to get back to business. But we really would like to see what the landscape looks like as far as the recruitment industry is concerned. And who better to talk about that than a person who's in charge of an organization that basically collects together a huge number of recruitment companies, and that could give us a good signal as to where it all stands. So maybe we can start there, Neil. How many companies currently are signed up to REC, and sort of what is the amount of information you can share with us today?
So we've got about 3,300 recruitment agencies as members. We've also got about 10,000 individual recruiters who are members of our professional body, REC Professional. That's about skills and development. And we all know that professional standards in the industry really, really matter. But as much now as at any other other times. So that's an important part of what we do. And I think the industry as a whole, we all know it is traditionally first in, first out on recessions. So clearly that across the world, you've seen the Q2 results from some of the big players come through over the last few weeks. The industry as a whole is taking a big hit. I think the challenge now is to understand what the bounce back looks like. Both the kind of immediate bounce back that I think does happen in our surveys, and the REC report on jobs was published yesterday morning, does show that there's quite a big snapback happening as the UK economy opens up again. But how far that snapback from opening up carries us and how far there is still to go is a big question that I know the client side are wrestling with, and of course that will define their interactions with us as recruiters. But also, let's not discount, and I was looking at the Brainfood on Sunday morning, it's another fantastic read, how much of the world that we are servicing has changed for good. So I think work has changed in a really fundamental way over the last few months. And I think how we don't yet know. I mean, there are tons of really bad hot takes about the end of the office out there. But we do know that there's some fundamental things that have been accelerated and amplified by the crisis that we've been through. And I think understanding and reacting to those is going to be really critical for us as an industry.
Yeah, and I think particularly so for staffing as well, and for two reasons. I mean, I'm thinking primarily on the remote working side. Most recruitment agencies are not remote; they're in office. Culturally, it is about getting in there. In fact, it's almost like part of the ritual that you have to come in, be at a desk, and be part of that buzzy atmosphere. Part of the reason why it's a great industry actually is that atmosphere. It's fantastic, but we're looking at distributed recruiters now, or recruiters that are not coming into the office, and that has impact on client meetings, impact on interviewing candidates, impact therefore on the quality of the relationships that maybe you would end up building, and how do those relationships change now that everything is kind of on digital and maybe default. Facebook today have just announced they're continuing their work from home policy to July 2021. So they've just looked into the distance and said, look, we're going to stick on another year on this because this isn't going to go away. And obviously Facebook, different business, but they do have a huge impact. These tech businesses do have a tendency, I think, to be a little bit ahead of the working trends. They were there with Agile way before everyone else. They were there with a distributed working before everyone else, and now they've just gone whole hog. So super interesting. But let me take you back to this journey that you went on, Neil, because you're saying that we've seen the big dip, and we saw the reports of the Q2 reports, didn't we? From Randstad, from Page Group, from all of the big boys, really. And they were looking at 30%, 40% even decline on revenue compared to 2019. So Q2 2020 versus Q2 2019, 30-40% reduction of revenue. It's like a horrifying, unprecedented break, really. You're saying there'll be definitely a bounce back, so we can now anticipate a snapback. But then how long, how high is that, and then how long does it sustain is currently under question.
So I'm a proponent of the Nike swoosh approach to the recovery, which says that the recovery is strong and sustained, but it doesn't go up at the pace it went down, and how far just reopening economies carry us as we deal with the virus. It is debatable. If I stuck a finger in the air based on what I heard from UK recruiters, I reckon that the average temp business dropped by about 40% in March and April, and the average perm business dropped by more like 80. Which is horrific. And part of the challenge here is resetting our mindsets. So a lot of what we're talking about at the REC is about the path back. So our jobs recovery tracker is measuring the growth that we've seen steadily over the last few weeks in the number of online ads, back north of 1 million now. Our report on jobs is measuring the performance of the market next to last month, because I think we can all sit around and go, well, recruitment activity is half of what it was in July 2019. I'm now not sure how much that tells us, because really the challenge is the path back from where we stand today. And that is all about, well, where are our clients now? Where is the economy now? And how is their need and willingness to work with us different? Because you have to stand back and say a lot of businesses are facing some pretty tough times and some pretty tough decisions. But we're an optimistic sector. I'm an ex-recruiter. Recruiters are by nature industrious. That whole piece about how do you operate a recruitment business with high levels of remote working, maybe we'll go on and talk about later. I think that productivity piece really matters, because I think we haven't yet worked out how to do that well. And I've got some recruitment business leaders who said to me that they think their productivity is down next to normal, and others who think it's up. So there are clearly, the secret sauce isn't there yet, in a way that we kind of all knew how a good desk would operate in the kind of pre-COVID world.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that. There's a surprising amount of teamwork that occurs within the over the desk setting, even though it's super competitive between the individuals. There is a lot of knowledge share that, the stuff that you throw over the desk or question you ask, you shout it out, people come back to you. Again, this is a really, we think of this as innovation now, but it's always been there in recruitment, really, really positive. But how do you replicate that in a distributed way? You probably don't have that ability. You can't just throw it into a chat stream and expect that to have the same impact. You made a very interesting point on the value of historical data compared to the value of data from the starting point of the bottom of this drop. And I really like that, Neil, because I think if we look back on history, of course, we're going to see a spectacular drop. We know this is a disaster, right? Like we know it's the disaster. Everyone gets that. But I like the fact that we can start tracking, seeing the shoots emerge, if you like, and what grows from that. Again, the analogy in my mind is that horrifying fire we had in Australia. Hi to the Australian friends that we have here watching, by the way, and it was devastating. But then, what type of things grow back, and you could see the emergence of that, is going to be different. It's going to be a different type of vegetation, different type of business that will emerge, and recruiters have got to kind of adapt to that.
I think that's absolutely right. And actually, I was just looking at Glenn's question about seeing agencies transitioning from a contingent service to a more product-led service, and I think that's a critical part of it. For me, the biggest mindset tripwire there is getting back to normal. Because I've spent 30 years of my career looking at labour markets in the UK and around the world. I don't know what normal looks like now. So we're all on this roller coaster. And actually, once it starts to move, I think there will be quite a lot of growth. But it will throw up very different questions to what we know before. So your clients are going to be growing different bits of their business. They'll be downsizing other bits of their business. They will have different problems that need solving. So the good recruiter is thinking, how do I get senior enough in a client business to understand what they think their people problem is now, and what the suite of solutions that I might be able to offer to resolve that are. And there's a whole slew of relationship challenges, because that throws up kind of how clients procure our services traditionally, and potentially creates some challenges there. But I think Glenn's question goes right to the heart of it, which is, how are we moving to being trusted professional services partners solving people problems, which most of the time is staffing and recruitment, but might be some other things as well. That's a very different offer, and it's actually a very different skill set. So internally, one of the things that I worry about more than anything is recruitment's a great route into a great career. I started in recruitment. Lots of people on the broadcast will have started in recruitment. And I think more senior consultants have the capacity to step up and do that kind of senior work. And I'm definitely seeing some agencies shifting from the 360 model to the 180 model to try and increase the specialism that consultants can offer. But I think people who are just starting, who are doing more of the resourcing work, that's going to be more challenging because of the change in dynamics of the industry, because clients are looking for something more consultative if they're looking for anything at the moment. At the same time, we've got a near record increase in candidate availability because in every country unemployment is going to be rising for the next few months at least.
Yeah, very good point. Just for your note, by the way, Glenn, thanks for that question. If you want to ask a question to Neil, please do so in the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. That's when we'll know where to look. Please do chat on the chat stream as normal, by the way, but questions generally need to be asked in that feature so that we can keep a track of it. Chat stream basically disappears and we'll lose it.
Delighted to see someone's in from Minneapolis. I am a huge Green Bay Packers fan. Just to thumb my nose at the Vikings.
You know what? There was a really interesting point that you kind of made, which was, what do recruiters need to do? And this is the topic of the show. What do recruiters need to do to really step up the value chain and be indispensable? When, if you like, the reason for us being is recruitment. If we're not hiring anymore, then what? If companies have, they've boxed us in the staffing world, right? It's literally the recruiting world. If they're not recruiting, we don't need that business. How do we negotiate our way to the point where actually we're valued, a valued supplier? Have you seen anything from the REC membership that's struck you as, hey, that's a good example of how to do that?
So I had a really interesting chat on a recent REC pod with Steve Bernard of ConnectWell. And he reflected on something that I think I'm getting. So my network, just a bit of background so people understand where I'm coming to this from personally. I was a recruiter for a while, and then I got into industrial relations. I did trade union negotiations. And then I ended up working at the CBI in the UK, which is the main business body, the equivalent of the US Chamber of Commerce in the United States. On kind of work and employment and labor things. So my career before I came to the REC a couple of years ago was really working with people, leaders at the top of big companies. And that network is the one I've been plugging into. And Steve Bernard and my discussion on the pod reached the same point, which is the main challenge right now is senior leaders in businesses around the world are confused. They don't have clarity. The world is very kind of foggy for them right now, other than we know that remote working is going to become normal. The FD's got their claws into the idea that we might not need an office. But then if we don't need an office, where does that innovation happen? As you were that cross-desk working that you referenced, Hung. My view is that kind of we're heading for some form of mixed model, because I don't see how fully remote is sustainable if you want to maintain a corporate culture and socialize new workers into the way the organization works and get the innovation right. So you've got these client businesses who are unsure. They're looking for understanding. They're looking for insight. And I think the businesses that will prosper in a space are the ones who can find their way into a conversation with a client, which is not, how can I help you hire? But how can I help you think about your people planning going forward? Some of that might be losing people or genning up in things like digital delivery. We've certainly seen web commerce job postings rise quite significantly over the last few months. And the challenge, I think, for an agency in getting there is twofold. One is about the relationships that you manage. So you might be working with an internal recruitment team as a client or a talent team, and you might need to get more senior and closer to the P&L than that in the business. And so managing the relationship that enables you to do that while not kind of biting the hand that has up to now fed you is really difficult. but you can always try and make them co-conspirators. The other thing I'd say is there's
I want to just underline that point because it's a very important point. Number one, agency supplier into a TA team. That's your operational interface, and by almost every sort of regard, this is your customer. However, in order for you to deal with the situation that we currently find ourselves, you need to diversify your relationships within that customer and talk to people at C-level, FD level, that kind of individual. Thinking beyond we need 50 heads in this department, because the internal TA team, and we've got a bunch of TA guys I'm watching the show here, also under the same kind of pressures. In many respects, these conversations, it doesn't matter whether you're an external supplier or you're an internal service provider. We've got the same situation in the sense we're bucketed in this department that isn't currently being utilized for the reason for it to be for being. In which case, how do we get into the conversation, different conversations?
Look, no, I think that's spot on, and actually that piece around how you make them your collaborators because it's in both your interests. It is really powerful and important. And the question that I've found big group chief executives asking is kind of two who's. Who looks after a client for us in our team? And do we have a team around the client or do we have one person? One of the big experiences that a lot of UK recruiters had, particularly smaller and medium-sized ones, is in the throes of the crisis, they furloughed a load of consultants. And guess what? As the owner-operator, it's kind of difficult to pick up on a client relationship which is still live when the person that your customer regards as their supplier isn't there. So there's a whole team around the client thing about how does your consultant talk to that TA team and your senior staff talk more strategically to the client. At the flip side of that then is who's your client, and do you have that ladder inside the client that enables you to bring a really good idea to a place where it will land well. I was talking to Ruth Penfold from BP recently, and she, I put the question to her directly, which is, how does a recruiter get time in your diary? And she said, well, I'm not recruiting at the moment, but if they've got an idea, I'm interested. And I think it's that insight and idea and thought leadership in an environment where clients themselves are a bit lost that cuts through. And that's where it comes to this paradox of Zoom. Because I think right now, actually, it's easier to get time with people than it is normally. Because people, everything we do is scheduled. Because we're not in the office, we don't have, so you probably get half an hour. The rise of the half-hour meeting, which was in that Harvard Business Review piece that was in Brainfood on Sunday morning, that I think is really interesting as a trend. But if it's easier to get that time, you've then got to have something to say in that time. So we're increasingly finding that REC members are phoning us up and asking about our labour market data and our read on different sectors and what we're seeing in terms of applicant trends. And what that is they're putting together packs which are about saying to a client, look, this is where we are in your local area, in your sector right now. And can we just spend some time mapping that onto what you want to achieve in your recovery plan? And let's just work out what there is, what we could help you with, but also what else you need to do in your apprenticeship program or with your own staff. And we are definitely starting to see a greater trend of other solutions being hung around pure staffing. In terms of what we can do as specialists. And that, I think in the long run, that's a difficult change for the industry to make, but I think it will help that progress to professional services.
Yeah, exactly. This is exactly what it is. You move from a very narrow set of deliverables, and that's high risk for you. Because in a downtime you're in trouble. But then if you're a full service provider of services with regards to people, then in almost any circumstance you might be able to provide that value. So in some respects, the companies that are best able to handle this then would be the ones that are data savvy for a start. Like they understand the value of market intelligence. They're not just banging out calls or doing, it's not just entirely sales driven, their approach. Is there an argument to say the size of a business is better positioned to deal with it? I mean, would you say a 50-man agency might be in a 50-person agency, should I say, is better positioned than one of the mega manpower style companies that are just huge, monstrous businesses?
I think you've got to segment the market when you look at these things. And Alex makes a great point in the chat for a Bears fan about management consultancies, because I think management consultancies absolutely are in this space. I'm a recruiter, and I'm a patriot for recruiters. I don't think they're any good at it by and large, by comparison with the kind of pragmatism and practical experience that recruiters can bring. And of course, by and large, we're also quite a bit cheaper than your average management consultancy. There's a value play there. But coming back to your question, that segmentation of the market, if you look at the kind of the big global firms, they are playing for some big contract work, whether it's through their MSPs or whether it's kind of just kind of more old-fashioned staffing contracts, where probably they need to go deeper in this thought leadership. And Manpower is a great example of a business that's really invested in this, as are Randstad and others. We saw the kind of Safely Back to Work initiative come through a couple of months ago. That depth is probably what they need for those big contracts where they are working closely with companies who are also of substantial size. But we've got members in the REC. There's someone on our council who is really a local recruiter for the couple of counties that they're in, but they're on the local enterprise partnership and they're engaged with the local chamber of commerce, and everyone knows them as the person who kind of knows what's going on in the local labour market and where the opportunities are. And that nexus point piece kind of helps them, because what they do is they bring the work that we do as the REC to their clients, but they add in some local knowledge and some niche specialisms that they have. And that makes a really compelling discussion for a potential client. Right. And I think we need to learn from those big time, the PwCs of this world, and I was talking to PwC's UK sales director this morning, and it feels really relevant, which is this piece around work comes to us because we show we can align with our clients. And it's a long sale, it's not a short sale. It's, you've given us some ideas, we like the plan, you're on board with what we want to do, and coming out of this, there's a package of work that you are well positioned to deliver. And that's different to a kind of contingent world that we've existed in. I don't think contingent's going to go away, but I think as the labour market changes, I think particularly bifurcates a bit, because we're going to have some pretty heavy skills shortages, even in a world of higher unemployment. There's real opportunity for those agencies who can position themselves in that professional services space.
You know what, Neil, you mentioned something about the short-termism in recruiting, and it's all based on the comp packages, and it's all based on how the revenue model works. And I'm not one of these that hammers contingency or that type of model, but it strikes me that those players that are in that space will have a tough time during tough times. They may in fact go dormant or leave the industry or do other things, but they'll then come back when there is a kind of a spike. So I don't necessarily see that agencies need to persist and suffer through a very tough time. I know a lot of recruiters back in the financial crash temporarily left the industry. They went and did property development for a couple of years with the knowledge that at some point the timing will be right for them to jump back in. And if you are a contingent recruiter, one of your advantages is that you are typically agnostic in terms of your industry sector. Let's say you're agnostic in terms of the type of person you recruit, the kind of customers you're dealing with. You're not ever being that interested, let's say, in the long-term play. It's all about let's hit where the demand is, deliver the service, the demand is where demand is acute, and then play in another place when the demand goes down, and be kind of like, for some reason, I've got this image of a mushroom, essentially something that isn't always there, but it will emerge in the right conditions and it'll disappear in the wrong conditions, but the thing will still be alive. Whereas other businesses that are more PS orientated, they're more like trees. They're going to put their roots down. They're going to invest a lot in growing a solid trunk and branches and everything, invest in all that. And then when the winter comes, they're going to drop their leaves, let's say, but they're still going to be around. It's still going to be visible. I guess agencies have a choice as to which broad path you want to take. Are you a tree or a mushroom? That's basically ask yourself there.
Yeah, I think we'll get. I'll get a T-shirt. I like a T-shirt with a slogan on, so I'll get the tree or mushroom brought to you by Hung Lee T-shirt made up. Look, I think that's really interesting, and the question I'd ask agencies to consider in that, because I think that's absolutely right, is it going to get more difficult for mushrooms to pop back up? Are the barriers to entry going to grow for contingent recruiters, driven by things like higher use of the tech stack, in terms of all the stuff that we see in Brainfood about use of AI. I think contingent as a model, yes, of course we're using ATSs and all that stuff, but it fundamentally isn't as technology heavy as perhaps the industry might be in 2 or 3 years' time. So, it's notable that some of the trees of this world, your Adecos, for instance, have spent the last few years not buying recruitment firms when they go into the market. They've been buying software firms.
Yep, tooling up.
I suppose my question, I think at the peak of the market, there will always be a space for contingent. I wonder whether the trees are going to have a better run in the way the market's going. And if you're a small player, that probably means you need to pick which forest you grow in, if I can extend this metaphor to tortured lengths.
I started the torturing long time before you got involved with this metaphor, but it's relevant, right? Because the tree grows big, it'll basically take the sunlight and it'll stop other things growing by being the dominant player. I'm kind of pro mushroom in some respects, because I think they're going to do it. And even though I'm also pro technology, but the one thing that I think technology has really failed to capture is intent. The candidate intent. It's really difficult to surface that out without massive invasion of privacy. Like right now, we're relying on people openly declaring they're available and interested in this job in order for us to have a data point to say, okay, we can throw some machine learning at it. If that person is not on a official database, I've harvested their data in some sort of gray way, and I'm trying to track their behavior in some sort of quasi-legal way, I'm going to run into all kinds of problems, and potentially, there'll be a legal barrier for me to do that. And the only way to avoid this is a human being picking up a phone call or sending that person a message and doing it that way. So I think contingency will survive and I think will thrive, but I do believe that the ground's going to dry up for them for sure. And it might be time either to, somehow become a tree or, do something else for a short period. LinkedIn, in fact, came up very recently with a blog post on, here are some alternative jobs for recruiters. And I just thought, wow, if LinkedIn are saying this, they know that, the customers, which are recruiters, obviously, have collapsed from their side. And they know that a lot of their customers are going to be looking for work. And here's some alternatives if recruitment isn't it.
Yeah, look, I think the I think there's a really interesting point there. I mean, you were sort of riffing earlier on that post by Mark that was in the newsletter this week on the kind of how hacking is sourcing actually in these days. And I think there is something here, which is how do we as agencies understand what humans are best at? And I think because I don't think you can fully automate this. I do think that online hiring is different, and we're already seeing, how you run interviews is different online and so forth. But if you look at a big issue of the moment, take inclusion, Black Lives Matter, how do we make sure that people are hiring inclusively? We know it's a big client priority increasingly. We've been doing some work with the Centre for Data Ethics in the UK because we're worried that kind of top-down AI models aren't doing real science; they're confirming the bias. And you see that post that was in the newsletter this week about engineering from LinkedIn Engineering, which has really positive overall numbers, but there is a difference between being positive and fair at the macro level and people's individual experience. And the example that makes this case is Scottish exam results this week. Now, those of you who aren't in the UK won't know what a scandal this has been. But essentially what has happened is the Qualifications Authority in Scotland has taken the predicted grades, because none of the kids could take exams, and applied a social test to come out with actual grades, because the predicted grades are all 20% higher than they might otherwise be. Now, at the macro level, that's absolutely fair, because the same percentage of kids from the same postcodes are getting the same results as they have in all the other previous years. But of course, at the individual level, you've got kids who were predicted an A living in poor postcodes who've now been given a C, despite the fact that they individually almost certainly were going to get an A. And that's where the technology falls down and the human interaction comes in. I suppose a big question for us as agency leaders is how do we get the humans doing the things that the humans are good at and leave to the technology the things that the technology is good at? That value added that we get from human beings. But all of that, I think, still speaks to the trees having some advantages. I wonder whether the answer, and I'm going to torture this analogy to death.
Make sure it's ground dust, Neil. Let's do it.
I think the answer is possibly when contingent comes back, it won't come back as a mushroom. It will come back as ivy, in it will spread in the areas where the ground is fertile. It will shrink back from the areas that the ground isn't fertile, and it will use the trees for learning. Yep.
I like it. Let's leave it there in terms of the analogy. I think we've created a beautiful scene.
It's a bucolic scene, yeah.
Well, I think all of the Brainfood is now in a rush into the nearest forest and try and examine some of the foliage there. But I think that analogy is right, because it is competition for scarce resources, and it's also how different organisms respond to tougher environments. And I guess the message I'm trying to say is that we don't necessarily need to all adopt the same policy. Some companies can and should tough it out. Some other companies should not tough it out. They should withdraw and then step back in if they want to at a better time. And that applies at the individual level as well. You made a really interesting point I want to touch on with the macro sort of fairness and the micro unfairness in terms of the lived experience. You might have just explained, I think, a lot of the problems we see with technology in recruitment in such a very simple way, that it is designed fair, but when people are designing them, they're not designing for one. They're designing for lots. That's what engineers do. They design as much as they can for the group. But at the lived individual level, there's going to be at least a percentage that have an unfair experience, and in the Scottish exam example, an outrageously unfair experience, potentially life-changing.
Felt particularly closely because I have my cousin's daughter was one of the unlucky ones, And actually, it's worked out okay for her because the university she was going for has basically said these exam results are all nonsense. Why don't you come anyway?
Yeah, just waiting through. Yeah.
But that is exactly it. Is the challenge of, it's a human industry. We do human relations. So we need to, and that, one of the things I say to agency owners when they're thinking about technology is start with having someone on your team who's responsible for thinking about what you need and is responsible for thinking how that deploys to the daily work of your team, rather than kind of believing what the vendors tell you it will do. Because that way you end up with you need to apply your knowledge of the work the business does to the technology you're bringing in to make sure it's effective and fair. And that agency thing, I think, is really important as we adopt more and more technology going forward. And I do think, we're in a tough space at the moment. Colin Donnery pointed out on Facebook that there isn't, we've talked a lot about kind of getting more consultancy relationship. And right now, of course, the market for that isn't as strong. Well, the market for nothing is particularly strong at the moment. The question is, how do we grow as the economy comes back? And I think a big part of that is us understanding the value of the skills that we have and not underselling them.
Right, absolutely right. And on Colin's point, what he's saying, and I'm reading in between the lines, but I'm going to go with this, is that should we be doing this consultancy for free, or are we going to charge for it? And if so, how do we charge for it when we know the customer is also purse strings so tight? So, and then if we're going to do it for free, then arguably should we not be hustling for whatever business that is still there? So that's the dilemma agencies have, is like, yes, it makes good sense to be this higher value person, but we've got literally no revenue through the door. How do we deal with this?
So we were talking about the old 2x2 4-box grid in the green room before we came live, of urgent versus important. And I think this for me is the biggest challenge any agency owner, operator, chief exec has right now, which is deciding how much time to spend on the absolute essential urgent work of getting some revenue in and keeping the wolves from the door, or deciding to, as you said, step back from it for a while. And the other side, which is positioning for the steady state of the new normal, whether that's 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months time, that we genuinely get back to something like normal levels of economic activity and hiring. And I think the answer probably is that there isn't a formula, that it will vary sector by sector and area by area, and that the balance is probably as much hustle as you need to do to get by, and as much long-term market repositioning as you can do to reposition. And each agency will have to read that. I mean, part of the issue that we're seeing in this recession in the UK is it doesn't have a center. Recessions traditionally in Britain have always had a center. In 08-09, it was London and financial services. In the 70s and 80s, it was the North and Midlands and Scotland and manufacturing. This one is disaggregated. Yes, because it's consumer facing, it's everywhere, led by the consumer facing industries. And recovery is really about confidence returning to consumers and to businesses to invest. But what that means is that as a recruiter, the sector that you're working in and the kind of business structure of the clients you have is going to define your path back, whether it's slow, medium, or quick, in a way that maybe we haven't seen before.
Yeah. You know what? A lot of this is about what the run rate is for business, for agencies, that is a strategic decision that unfortunately has already been made. Because if you're running a very efficient business, quote unquote, and you're growing and that's all you're caring about, you might just be have caught yourself out of gas, because you are reliant on a consistent stream of revenue, which you cannot predict. You can't sensibly predict that, I would say, for the next several months, even further, years down the line. But if you've got cash in bank, or you've got some sort of reserve, then now is the time where you might actually be in a strong position and as you say, reposition. Final question.
Just to add that point, though, I'm well aware there's investment funds out there looking at recruiters now in a way that there wasn't 6 months ago. So we do kind of quiet line at the REC in understanding who's looking and who's selling. Mm-hmm. And there's definitely money in the market from PE and from big recruitment firms thinking at this point, are there investments we want to make, which is a level of activity that should give us some confidence. Coming back to Colin's question about contraction, mm-hmm. I think the market will contract in the UK this year and probably the first half of next. For me, I hesitate to put a figure on that because so much of it is about whether we snap back or whether we have a slower recovery. I think recruitment is super responsive to market conditions, and as furlough ends, you won't have client businesses who have a backpack full of ex-furloughed staff they're looking to redeploy, and they will need to start thinking about how they engage with the market again.
Yep. That's good stuff. Colin, if you do have an opinion or a number, please do share it with us, because I think that's a very difficult one to try and nail down. Okay, good stuff. Let's have a look at some of these other questions. Steve mentioned, I saw this question a bit earlier. I want us to deal with this one here, particularly when we're talking about, okay, we should do consultancy. We should, not necessarily focus on core business that's currently not doing business. Are you saying that we need to acquire new skills outside of sourcing and relationship management? The answer is yes, I think, to that. But what new skills? Should recruiters be thinking about and learning to be viable as a potential professional services provider?
So if you're looking for a good read on this, the REC's Future of Jobs report is a little long in the tooth now, but I think there's some fundamentals in there that are still true. I think that thing about things like relationship management, it's a different form of relationship management. We talk about how should we prospecting and billing for long term. I think we're moving to a world where our services are going to be a more consultative than transactional sale for a while, possibly for the long haul. So a lot of it is about, to be flippant, 2 of these and 1 of those, and using them in that ratio, rather than the culture we all grew up in. And I hammered the cold calls as a recruiter 20 years ago, where it was a much more hard sell. We're always going to be a selling industry. I think how we sell will be different. Gordon's just put business analysis up on the chat. He's absolutely right. We've got to understand our data. One of the things I was talking to Pete Tomlin at Reed recently about the data Reed.co.uk generates, and whether recruiters really use that data that Reed provides, and almost whether sometimes some of the CRMs that we're using are kind of abstracting some of the signal that data can give us. So how we use data, how we understand what works, what recruitment marketing works, especially in an environment when people aren't doing all the same things online as they were before the crisis. So data analysis, business analysis, I think those things will be critically important as well.
What else, Neil? Any idea? By the way, not all on Neil. Everyone watching this, have a think about what are the new skills recruiters should take the opportunity to acquire right now outside of our core, which is sourcing for candidates and doing new business sales. And in-house recruiters also have those as core, by the way. Oftentimes they're the same skills, just deployed internally. But maybe we need to diversify away from that. If so, what are they? Please do share them in the chat, because it'd be great to have some more thoughts as to what they may be. Okay, moving on, Neil. I wanted to just touch base with you on a few more issues here. We talked about repositioning as a PS business as one of the things that you can do. Are there any tactical things that you would recommend for companies to make that shift. So I'm running a business. My customer thinks that Hong's a great supplier of candidates. What's the steps I need to take to renegotiate that relationship? Obviously, provision of market intelligence, we've talked about before. What are the things that come to mind that could be relevant for me to try?
So let's start with something we hinted at earlier. First, do no harm. Okay, so don't torpedo the relationships you have. So you need to make sure the people you know inside the client business are co-conspirators in where you're going. Let's have a discussion with the people you know about what they're hearing inside. So you have to do a bit of the MI6/CIA stuff on your client's industry and what they're thinking about. And then I think it's a bit about solutioning. Have you got a bit of thought leadership that allows you to have a slightly broader discussion with them? And that way you can use organizations like the REC, other industry bodies, some of the official data to just see if you can come up with an idea that starts a conversation. Now, critical to Colin's point earlier on, that discussion might not be billable, but what you're trying to do is create a space where you're seen as someone who can solve some of their problems. Because at that point, and this by the way is how lawyers and accountants work. I have 2 employment lawyers I have worked with for 30 years. If something really bad happens or I need a really serious bit of advice, they're the only 2 people I call. And we need to get to that space as businesses as well. Now, some of that, so there's a kind of throughput piece that you want to maintain. And then there's you want to get to that space where you're their trusted advisor. So a little bit of thought leadership. And then as Elizabeth and others have said in the chats, getting much better at understanding the campaigns funnel. Now, this is funny to me because I've worked in public affairs for a long time, but the campaigns funnel is actually a really good way to think about what you're doing, because you're going to put a lot of companies, a lot of clients into that space of trying to have that added value conversation. But you're going to use your understanding of data and your analytics to work out what's working, what gets you the next meeting. You're going to see a few make progress down to having a meeting to discuss their HR plans, and maybe 1 or 2 come out the other side, but you need 1 or 2 kind of leading examples of what you can do to go up on the website, do your testimonials, all the stuff we've always done. So that kind of funnel analysis piece is really important. And we've talked about data already. Understanding how to communicate with candidates, I think, is also critical. And I know employer branding, as Steve said in the chat, is really important in-house. But actually, it's also about the changing market and where people are looking for work, and actually increasingly where people are not looking for work, because it might be that people get a lot more applications for jobs in this market, but the people they need aren't looking for jobs, because the other thing that's happening, of course, is that passive candidates are gripping on tighter.
Yep.
So that's that skill set of relationship building with a candidate. I do not believe that the focus on candidate experience should drop just because we're in a more of a client-driven market. Because I actually think the candidates that you will get most reward from clients for finding are likely to be the ones who are in-house and already and holding on tight.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the instinct is obviously to drop it, because talent attraction, quote unquote, may not feel the same, because suddenly your ads are getting like 10 times the amount of ad response. But that may be a false signal, because you might be getting a lot of irrelevant ad response. I saw a report earlier this week about this, where I forget who it was that sent it around, but essentially people who are in job insecure scenario, they're going to start applying to more jobs than they did before, simply because they're just throwing more at it. And you've got to find a way to deal with that. And a lot of the ways, I think, is you've got to think about how you frame the advert. Are you describing it in such a way that it attracts the right people, but also signals clearly that it's not a suitable opportunity for others. We talked about that, I think, on how to diversify your pipeline with Katrina Kibben a couple of weeks ago. So all of that, I think, is good advice, but it should mean better candidate experience, because it means that you should be speaking to more relevant people and not necessarily people that are not going to have a shot at that particular job.
Well, and I think actually clients are thinking about how they run a very different process now. We're just about to launch actually next month, and you very kindly did a video for part of it, a course with Future Learn, which is available globally. It's a free 3-week course for internal recruiters on how to hire well online, and it's using all of the REC standards and the REC's lessons to help people think about the employer branding in this time, the kind of flood of CVs you're likely to get, online interviewing, use of other tests, and right up to and including onboarding. The reason we're doing that is, we need to remember, come back to the point I made earlier, clients are a bit more lost than usual in this space. So the more that we can do as agencies just to help them with, I talk about thought leadership. Thought leadership does not need to be, this is the future of your industry. It can be, have you thought about how your guys interviewing online are doing a different thing to what they were doing before, and how you need to support them? And look, here are 5 to 10 things that we think are really important to doing that. That kind of stuff, well researched, I think goes a long way.
You know what? It reminds me of another skill, maybe, that agencies that have this type of a skill set within their businesses are going to perhaps be a stronger trees going forward as well. Just to revive that analogy, Neil, because ideally, if you had paid attention to things like content creation and thinking about data and producing this type of value add stuff, rather than just staff your entire organization with 100 recruiters, you had a more diverse skill set. You had some marketing people, you had some content folks, you had other types of people within your business. You might then be able to be better able to provide these types of value added services. Previously, they were trivial kind of cherry on top stuff. But now it may just be a critical piece of intelligence that customer is really looking for, and will really help embed your relationship or maintain that relationship in these trying times. Okay, cool. Neil, coming to the end of the show, I want to just check out any final questions that we might have missed. Let's dive into some of these. Let's take the one here by Alistair. Alistair's saying, anyone else using the Spotify squad model for recruitment? We found that with so many more candidates on the market and so many more candidate sourcing tools to get through, and much more biz dev to do, we've split our responsibilities into verticals and it's working well. So I guess the question is, are agencies using a squad model? And basically this is like creating agile teams, I guess, to work on biz dev, I guess. So I mean, Alistair, help me out whether this is right or wrong, but I'm imagining you're saying instead of having a 360 recruiter or even a 180 recruiter, you just have kind of rapidly assembled squads that will do one thing for this period of time, and then they may go ahead and do something else whilst you've got parallel stuff happening. I'm not sure many agencies run that way, but maybe they should.
So I'm definitely seeing as I said earlier, a flip back towards 180 from 360. I think the leading edge probably is going down this route, and it's a kind of development of agile that we haven't seen before. One of the big challenges to agencies, if this normalizes, is what does it mean for our REM approaches? Because REM traditionally, while we'd already moved away from completely individualized REM to something a bit more balanced before the crisis, I think we'll probably need to look again at that.
This is the big this is the big crisis, isn't it? Where you've got the individual incentivization prevents a lot of the innovation in many respects. We're locked into this you have a 150K target or 200K target, whatever it is, and everything you do needs to be spent on trying to deliver that target, and everything outside of it is an opportunity cost. And that type of business, I would say, is your mushroom, needs to shrink and disappear and then come back when the time is right. But you're going to struggle to survive in this type of environment, I think. We've got time quickly to jump into this final question from Chris Allen at LinkedIn. Chris Allen Smith, I beg your pardon. Chris is asking, Bitcoin, robots, innovation, how does that blend in the future of workforce, of the future of borderless talent? So let's take this into the context of recruitment agency. So we have this distributed workforce globally now. We're all going to get used to doing that. We're going to be Bitcoin. I think he's talking about blockchain maybe. So potentially you've got different solutions that might be able to track the kind of work and effort and map that to a person doing the work. And how does that affect recruiters? Does it remove the recruitment agent from the scene? Or are we still human beings needing that human touch?
So one, we're still human beings. I think, now I'll leave out Bitcoin for a moment. I have opinions on Bitcoin, but they're distinctly personal and probably not for this for this discussion. But if you look at kind of AI, robotification, automation, because a lot of the tech that we're seeing already in the field and recruitment is actually automation rather than AI. I think that makes the process more efficient. I don't think it removes the human being as an example. I'll give you a very precise example that I have seen, a live example in the last few weeks. Because we are recruiting online now, it is perfectly possible, and I have seen an example of this, for a passive candidate who is not looking for a job to get a call from a recruiter on Monday, to talk to the recruiter on Zoom on Tuesday, to do an interview on Wednesday and a second interview on Thursday, and to have a job offer on Friday. Now, you tell me whether someone should make a life-changing decision 5 days after being in a completely different space. We are human beings, and we need to manage that process with better touch than that. And that's really what a recruitment consultant does. In that particular case, one of the things the consultant did was say that possibly asking a father with 3 small children, having done an interview at 4 o'clock on the Wednesday, to do another interview at 11 a.m. on the Thursday, which had a task to complete associated with it. It was possibly not best for their employer brand. So it's about using the technology and using the human side. I think there are some big changes though coming. One of the things that I picked up from the Brainfood this week was the kind of the idea of, what's going rate for a job when jobs can be done from anywhere. And that kind of thing, that is going to bleed into the human side. So kind of thinking about things like pay setting, another great area for recruiters to add some value to clients on.
Yep, absolutely. I think we're always being kind of, I see recruiters as not necessarily great innovators, but we are great adapters. We're not the first types of people to have the idea, I feel, but we're very, very quick to adopt the new idea, see the trend, and actually start delivering services around that. So I think that's how recruitment is going to play out. It's not going to disappear. It's going to be extremely tough for a period. There's no doubt about that, because of the economic contraction is unprecedented. It is a global situation. I don't think we've ever seen a situation where every single country is more or less in the same boat and getting smaller in terms of its contraction. That's incredible. Exactly. So that inevitably means less recruiting to be done. And we've all got to kind of work against that essential truth. But we are massively adaptable. One of the things, like we always talk about, we're not very diverse in terms of the skills or personalities we hire into our industry. I think that is true. But one of the advantages is that the skills that we do hire and the characteristics we hire tends to be things that will work for us here. Resilience, adaptability, creativity, ability to get over hurdles, ability to see opportunities. I think we double down on those things. Then a lot of us are going to be more right than perhaps we may think in our darkest moments.
And we're optimistic. We're optimistic.
We are indeed. Neil, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining the show. I'd love to get you back. I'm sure the crowd will as well, because it seems that there's so much more that we could get out of this conversation. So, and I want to revive that analogy again, see if we can continue to bring it to life.
I'll have the t-shirt by then.
Yeah, absolutely. But thank you very much, Neil, for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for joining Brainfood Live on air, whether you're on Crowdcast, LinkedIn, Facebook, Periscope, or whatever on the internet. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks again to our sponsors, CVCheck. They're referencing checking tool. Essentially, very important that you use technology of this type when you're hiring for people who you might never meet. So check out cvcheck.com. We'll be back with you next week with another show. We're going to be talking about, what are we talking about? Something interesting. Follow the channel and you'll figure it out. No, actually it's relevant to this show as well, Neil, because it's about how you do job seeking as a head of talent. So this show, we've been talking a little bit more agency focused, but next week we're going to be talking about, now you're a senior recruitment person, particularly in internal setting. What has your job search been like? How are you navigating that? And we've got a load of experienced pros that are currently in the job search, have recently found work as a head of TA within this crisis, and they're going to talk to us about candidate experience, what they've encountered on the other side of the fence, having probably not been there for a long time. These are people that usually get headhunted for jobs, so that's not candidate experience. That's been concierge all the way through, but they've had to sort of not out of their choice look for work. And it's going to be fascinating to check that out. So make sure you sign up for that show for next week. All right, that's about it. The sun is shining, everyone in the UK. So go out and enjoy the weekend. Stay safe. Wear a damn mask. We'll see you next Friday.